The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Utah sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple as Virginia Bowden stood on the barren soil of what was once the most prosperous ranch in Moab. Tears streamed down her dust-covered face as she surveyed the decimated crops and empty pastures that had been in her family for 3 generations. In her trembling hand, she clutched the deed to the Bowden ranch, now worth little more than the paper it was printed on. The drought of 1887 had been unforgiving. Virginia had watched helplessly as the merciless sun scorched her family's wheat fields, and the creek that ran through their property dried to nothing more than a trickle. The cattle grew thin, then began to die. Her father, Thomas Bowden, had worked himself to exhaustion trying to save what he could, digging deeper wells and hauling water from town. He'd passed away in his sleep just 2 months ago, leaving Virginia alone to face the mounting debts and failed harvests. At 24, Virginia had inherited not only the ranch, but the responsibility of its workers, most of whom she'd already been forced to let go. The bank was circling like vultures, and despite her best efforts, the future looked as bleak as the dusty landscape surrounding her. "This land ain't dead, miss. It's just restin." The deep voice startled Virginia from her thoughts. She spun around to find a tall man standing a few yards away, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, he sat atop a magnificent chestnut gelding, leading a mule laden with packs. "Who are you?" Virginia demanded, hastily wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "This is private property." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Name's Warren Foster," he said, removing his hat in a gentlemanly gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I've been riding through these parts looking for work." "Heard in town the Bowden place might need some hands." Virginia laughed bitterly. "You heard wrong, Mr. Foster. We can't afford to feed ourselves, let alone hire help." She gestured toward the barren fields. "As you can see, there's nothing left to work." Warren stepped closer, and Virginia noticed his eyes were a striking blue, the color of a mountain lake, contrasting sharply with his sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth sack. "I didn't come empty-handed," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've got seed, drought-resistant wheat from up north, been saving it for the right place." He opened the sack, revealing the golden grains inside. "I reckon this is it." Virginia stared at the seeds, then back at the stranger's face. "Why would you help us? You don't even know me." Warren smiled, creases forming at the corners of his eyes. "I knew your father, Miss Bowden. Met him years back when I was just a boy. He helped my family when we were passing through during hard times." He looked out at the fields. "Thomas Bowden was a good man. I owe him." "Well, I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing, Mr. Foster. 1 sack of seed won't save this ranch, and I have no way to pay you for your labor." Warren replaced his hat and looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not asking for pay, I'm offering a partnership." He gestured toward the seed bag. "We replant together, split whatever comes of it. I've got strong arms, knowledge of dry farming techniques, and nowhere particular to be." He paused. "What have you got to lose that you ain't already losing?" Virginia felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in months' hope, but suspicion quickly tamped it down. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Foster?" "A chance to put down roots. Been drifting too long." His expression turned serious. "I'm not looking to take advantage, Miss Bowden. Your father once gave me a chance when nobody else would. I'm just returning the favor." Virginia studied him carefully. There was something in his steady gaze that made her want to trust him, despite every instinct screaming caution. She'd heard too many stories of women losing their land to smooth-talking strangers. "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. Warren nodded. "Fair enough. I'll be making camp by the creek, what's left of it. Think it over tonight. I'll come by in the morning for your answer." As he mounted his horse, Virginia found herself asking, "How did you know my father?" Warren paused, one foot in the stirrup. "Winter of '75. My ma was sick, pa was hurt. We were stranded outside of town. Your father found us, brought us here, let us stay until spring." His eyes grew distant with memory. "I was just 10 years old, but I never forgot the kindness of Thomas Bowden." With that, he tipped his hat and rode toward the creek, leaving Virginia standing in the fading light with more questions than answers, and the first flutter of hope she'd felt since the drought began. That night, Virginia sat at her kitchen table, a solitary lamp casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface. Her mother's Bible lay open before her, though she'd barely read a word. Her thoughts kept drifting to the stranger with the bag of seeds and the offer that seemed too good to be true. The ranch house felt emptier than usual. Since her father's passing, Virginia had grown accustomed to the silence, but tonight it pressed in on her from all sides. Her mother had died when she was just 16, and her younger brother had left for California 3 years ago, chasing gold and adventure. The last letter she'd received from him was over a year old. Through the window, Virginia could see the small flicker of Warren Foster's campfire in the distance. What did she really know about this man? Only that he had a kind face, strong hands, and claimed to have a debt to her father. It wasn't much to stake her future on. And yet, what choice did she have? The bank would foreclose within months if she couldn't make a payment. The ranch hands, the few who had stayed out of loyalty, had already gone without proper wages for too long. Virginia had sold most of her mother's jewelry and was down to eating 1 meal a day to stretch what little food remained. She closed the Bible and made her decision. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day as Virginia stepped onto her porch to find Warren Foster already approaching, leading his horse and mule. He'd shaved, she noticed, and wore a clean shirt despite the dust that seemed to cover everything in Moab these days. "Morning, Miss Bowden," he called, stopping at the edge of her yard. "Thought I'd get an early start, whatever your decision." Virginia straightened her shoulders. "If we're to be partners, Mr. Foster, you should call me Virginia." A slow smile spread across his face. "Virginia," he repeated as if testing the name, "and I'm Warren." "I have conditions," she added quickly. "First, everything gets put in writing. Second, you sleep in the bunkhouse, not the main house. Third, this is still my ranch, my name's on the deed. I have final say on decisions." Warren nodded solemnly. "Sounds fair. I have one condition of my own." Virginia raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" "You have to promise to tell me if you start running out of food or supplies. No hiding hardship out of pride. Partners are honest with each other." Virginia felt her cheeks flush, thinking of the nearly empty pantry she'd been pretending wasn't a problem. "Agreed," she said finally. They shook hands, his calloused palm warm against hers, and Virginia couldn't help but notice how her small hand disappeared in his grasp. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a current of understanding, perhaps, or the silent acknowledgement that they were both taking a leap of faith. "Let me show you the property," Virginia said, breaking the moment. "What's left of it, anyway?" Throughout the morning, Virginia led Warren around the Bowden ranch, showing him the dried-up creek, the empty cattle pens, and the parched fields that had once yielded abundant wheat and corn. As they walked, Warren asked thoughtful questions about the soil, the usual rainfall patterns, and which crops had thrived in previous years. "Your father was smart to focus on wheat," Warren commented as they surveyed the largest field. "It's hardier than most." He knelt down, scooping up a handful of soil and letting it sift through his fingers. "The land is good, just needs water and time." "We've little of either," Virginia remarked, watching as he studied the terrain with a critical eye. Warren pointed to the distant hills. "Your creek comes from those mountains, right? What if we follow it up, see if there's a way to divert more water down to your fields? Father tried that last year. The water's just not there." Warren nodded thoughtfully. "What about wells? How deep has your family dug?" 30 feet at the deepest, near the house. We hit water, but it's barely enough for household use, let alone irrigation. I've seen places out west where they dig twice that deep and find good water." Warren stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. "It's worth trying." Virginia sighed. "With what equipment? What workers? I told you, Mr. Foster Warren, I can barely feed myself." Warren grinned. "I didn't come alone, Virginia." He gestured to his mule. "Got tools, supplies, and enough food to last a month if we're careful. And these hands," he held them up, "have dug more wells than I care to count." For the first time, Virginia allowed herself to believe this might work. "Where do we start?" "First, we salvage what we can of your existing crops. Then we prepare the soil in your best field for the new seed. Meanwhile, I'll start surveying for the best spot to dig a deeper well." His expression grew serious. "It won't be easy. We'll be working from sunup to sundown." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Foster." "I never thought you were," he replied quietly. That night, after Warren had settled into the bunkhouse, Virginia sat alone at her kitchen table drafting their agreement. The terms were simple. Warren would provide labor, expertise, and his seed stock in exchange for half of whatever harvest they managed to produce. If they failed, he would walk away with nothing but his original supplies. If they succeeded, they would discuss a more permanent arrangement. As she signed her name, Virginia wondered if she was being foolish, trusting a stranger with her family's legacy. But as she gazed out the window toward the bunkhouse, where a light still burned Warren planning the next day's work, no doubt she felt a peculiar sense of peace. For the first time since her father's death, Virginia wasn't alone. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the Bowden ranch. Each morning, Virginia and Warren rose before dawn and worked until the last light faded from the sky. Warren taught Virginia dry farming techniques he'd learned in Arizona and Nevada, methods of preserving moisture in the soil and protecting seedlings from the harsh sun. They started by clearing the largest field of dead plants and breaking up the hard, packed earth. Warren showed Virginia how to create shallow depressions around each seed to catch and hold what little moisture fell or was carried by the morning dew. "The key is to trap every drop," he explained as they worked side by side, their backs aching and hands blistered from hours of labor. "Water's precious as gold out here." While Virginia tended to the seed planting, Warren began the arduous task of digging a new well closer to the fields. Each day, he descended deeper into the earth, hauling bucket after bucket of soil to the surface. By the end of the second week, he had reached 40 feet without finding water. "Maybe it's a fool's errand," Virginia said one evening as they sat on the porch, too exhausted to move but too restless to sleep. Warren shook his head. "I've got a feeling about this one. The soil's changing, getting damper." Virginia studied his profile in the fading light. 2 weeks of working together had made her more comfortable in his presence, but no less curious about the man himself. "Where did you learn so much about farming in dry country?" Warren took a long drink from his tin cup before answering. "After my folks died, I was taken in by a family down in Arizona. Old man was a farmer who'd moved out from the east, nearly failed his first few years until the local Apache showed him how they grew crops with minimal water." He smiled at the memory. He was smart enough to listen. I was smart enough to watch and learn. And how did you end up drifting? Virginia asked, realizing she knew little about the years between his childhood encounter with her father and his arrival at her ranch. A shadow crossed Warren's face. War has a way of uprooting a man. After I came back from fighting, the family farm had been sold. My adoptive parents had passed on. He shrugged. Found it hard to stay in one place after that. Virginia nodded, understanding loss all too well. My brother joined up, came back different, couldn't settle back into ranch life. Last I heard, he was heading to California. War changes people, Warren said softly. Some find their way back, some don't. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Virginia found herself stealing glances at Warren, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle way he handled his cup despite his massive hands. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't realized she'd been missing. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for coming here. For helping." Warren turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "You don't need to thank me, Virginia. This partnership benefits us both." "Still," she insisted, "you could have passed by, chosen an easier path." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in Virginia's chest. Easy paths rarely lead anywhere worth going. The next day, at 47 feet below the surface, Warren struck water, a strong, clear stream that filled the bottom of the well faster than he could bail it out. His jubilant shout brought Virginia running from the fields. "We did it," Warren called up from the depths of the earth. "We've got water, Virginia. Real water." The excitement in his voice was contagious, and Virginia found herself laughing out loud for the first time in months. When Warren climbed out of the well, covered in mud but grinning like a child at Christmas, she didn't think twice before throwing her arms around him in celebration. For a moment, they stood frozen, both surprised by her impulsive gesture. Then Warren's arms encircled her waist, lifting her off her feet in a spin that left her breathless and laughing again. "This changes everything," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands at her waist. "With a good well, we can irrigate the fields properly. The seeds will have a fighting chance." Virginia, suddenly aware of their closeness, stepped back, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We still need a way to get the water to the fields," she said, trying to sound practical despite the warmth spreading through her body. "I've been thinking on that," Warren replied, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "We can build a windmill to pump the water, then use wooden troughs to direct it where we need it most." "A windmill would cost money we don't have," Virginia reminded him. Warren's eyes sparkled with determination. "Leave that to me. There's an abandoned homestead about 10 miles east. Saw it when I was riding in. The windmill's still standing, just needs some repair. You can't just take someone else's windmill. The place has been empty for years, according to folks in town. Besides, I'm not taking it, just borrowing some parts to build our own." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Trust me, Virginia, we're going to make this work." And somehow, despite all the odds stacked against them, Virginia did trust him. The next 3 days saw Warren riding out to the abandoned homestead and returning with pieces of the old windmill strapped to his mule. Meanwhile, Virginia continued tending to their newly planted field, carefully watering each seed depression with buckets she hauled from the house well, saving the new well's bounty for the irrigation system Warren was planning. By the end of the week, a crude but functional windmill stood beside the new well, its wooden blades catching the persistent Utah wind and converting it to power that drove a pump Warren had salvaged and repaired. Water flowed through a network of wooden troughs Warren had constructed, reaching the furthest corners of their planted field. "It's a miracle," Virginia whispered as they stood together watching the precious water bringing life to their parched land. "Not a miracle," Warren corrected gently. "Just hard work and a bit of know-how." Virginia turned to look at him, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and transformed her hopeless situation in a matter of weeks. The setting sun bathed his face in golden light, softening the edges of his weathered features. Something shifted inside her, a recognition of feelings she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "Why did you really come here, Warren?" she asked quietly. "The truth." Warren's gaze remained on the fields for a long moment before he finally looked at her. "I told you about meeting your father when I was a boy. What I didn't tell you was that he made me promise something." His voice grew softer. "He said, boy, if you ever find yourself able to help someone the way I'm helping you now, you do it. That's how we survive out here, by lifting each other up when times get hard." He took a deep breath. "When I heard in town about Thomas Bowden's daughter struggling to save the family ranch, I knew it was time to keep that promise." Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. It sounded exactly like something her father would say. "He would be proud of what you're doing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Warren's expression softened. "He'd be prouder of you, Virginia. Most would have given up long ago." As they stood together in the fading light, watching water flow to thirsty soil, Virginia felt something new taking root alongside their seed, something equally fragile, equally full of potential. The weeks that followed brought gradual but undeniable progress. Tiny green shoots began to emerge from the soil, reaching for the sun with delicate persistence. Each new sprout was cause for celebration, evidence that their gamble might yet pay off. Warren continued to surprise Virginia with his ingenuity and work ethic. He repaired the fallen sections of fencing, reinforced the barn roof, and even managed to trade his skilled labor in town for a few chickens and a milk cow, providing them with fresh eggs and milk. June faded into July, bringing even more intense heat, but also the first real growth in their wheat field. The creek remained a mere trickle, but their well and windmill system provided enough water to keep the young plants alive. One evening, as they sat on the porch shelling peas from the small kitchen garden Warren had helped Virginia plant, she found herself studying his hands, strong, capable hands that had brought so much change to her world. "Tell me about your family," she said, realizing how little she still knew about him despite weeks of working side by side. Warren's movement slowed. "Not much to tell. Parents died of fever when I was 11. No brothers or sisters." He paused. "The family that took me in, the Hendersons, they were good people, treated me like their own. They had 3 daughters, all older than me." "Is that why you're so comfortable around a woman giving orders?" Virginia teased, trying to lighten his suddenly somber mood. "It worked." Warren chuckled. "Reckon so. Those girls bossed me around something fierce." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "But they also taught me to cook, sew a straight seam, and appreciate the strength it takes to be a woman in this territory." Virginia smiled, thinking of her own mother. "My mama was like that. Soft-spoken but made of iron underneath." She sighed. "I miss her wisdom sometimes, especially now." "What would she advise you about our situation?" Warren asked, his voice gentle. Virginia considered the question. "She'd probably tell me to count my blessings instead of my troubles." She glanced at Warren. "And to recognize a good man when I see one." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Virginia thought Warren might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and returned to shelling peas. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," he said quietly. The next morning, Virginia woke to the sound of voices, multiple voices coming from outside. She dressed hastily and rushed to the porch to find Warren speaking with 3 men on horseback. Her heart sank when she recognized one of them as Harold Jenkins, the bank manager from Moab. "Miss Bowden," Jenkins called, tipping his hat with artificial politeness. "I was just telling your farmhand here that I've come to discuss your outstanding loan." Virginia straightened her shoulders and descended the porch steps. "Mr. Jenkins, this is unexpected." "Not entirely, I think," Jenkins replied, his thin lips curling into what might have been meant as a smile. "Your payment is 2 months overdue. The bank has been more than patient." "And we appreciate that patience," Virginia said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "As you can see, we're working to bring the ranch back to productivity. The wheat crop is coming along nicely." Jenkins cast a dismissive glance at their field. "A single field of wheat won't cover what you owe, Miss Bowden. I'm afraid the bank requires more immediate assurance." "How much time do we have?" Warren asked, stepping forward to stand beside Virginia. Jenkins turned his attention to Warren, eyeing him with thinly veiled contempt. "The bank is prepared to foreclose at the end of next month unless a significant payment is made." "And what would constitute significant?" Virginia asked. "Half of what's owed would stay proceedings for another 6 months. Jenkins produced a folded document from his coat pocket. "I've taken the liberty of bringing the figures with me." Virginia took the paper with trembling fingers. The amount stated made her heart sink. Even if their entire wheat field yielded perfectly, they wouldn't have enough to make half the payment in time. "We'll have the money," Warren said firmly. Jenkins raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Will you indeed? And how do you propose to manage that miracle, Mr. Foster, Warren Foster? And it won't be a miracle, just hard work." Jenkins exchanged looks with his companions. "Well, Mr. Foster, I wish you luck. You'll need it." He settled his hat more firmly on his head. 1 month, Miss Bowden. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to take possession." As the 3 men rode away, Virginia felt the paper crumple in her clenched fist. "We can't possibly raise this much in a month. The wheat won't be ready to harvest for at least 6 weeks. Warren's jaw was set in a determined line. "Then we'll find another way." "What other way?" Virginia demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "We have nothing else to sell, nothing else to harvest." Warren placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Virginia, listen to me. I'm not going to let you lose this ranch. We'll figure something out, together." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. For a wild moment, she wanted to lean into him, to draw strength from his certainty. Instead, she nodded, forcing herself to believe him despite the evidence of impossibility. "Together," she agreed softly. That evening, after a simple dinner, Warren spread a map on the kitchen table. "I've been thinking," he began, tracing a finger along a line that represented a trail. "There's a cattle buyer in Green River who pays top dollar for prime stock. If we could get our hands on even a small herd, drive them to market." Virginia shook her head. "We don't have any cattle left. The ones that didn't die, Father sold to pay off previous debts." "I know that," Warren said patiently. "But there's wild cattle in the canyons to the south, strays from various ranches, some probably from your own herd that wandered off during the drought. If we could round up enough of them." "That's rustling," Virginia exclaimed. "Not if they're unclaimed or originally yours," Warren countered. "Most would carry brands, yes, but a good number will be unbranded calves born wild. Those would be fair game." Virginia considered the idea. It was risky but not illegal if they stuck to truly unclaimed cattle. "Even if we could find enough, how would we drive them to Green River with just the 2 of us?" Warren grinned. "I was hoping you'd ask that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "I wrote to an old Army friend who's been working as a ranch hand near Price. He and 2 others are willing to help with the drive in exchange for a cut of the profits." Virginia stared at him in amazement. "You've been planning this?" Just keeping options open, Warren admitted. After Jenkins showed up today, I sent a telegram confirming the arrangement. For the first time since the banker's visit, Virginia felt a glimmer of hope. How soon can they get here? 3 days. Maybe 4. Warren studied her face. It's dangerous work, Virginia. We'd be in rough country, and there's no guarantee we'll find enough cattle to make it worthwhile. Virginia squared her shoulders. I've been riding these canyons since I was a girl. I know where the water holes are, where strays would likely gather. She met his gaze directly. I'm going with you. Warren looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. I figured you'd say that, he said with a resigned smile. We'll leave as soon as my friends arrive. That gives us just over 3 weeks to find the cattle and drive them to market. As they planned late into the night, Virginia found herself watching Warren the confident way he outlined their route, the careful consideration he gave to potential problems. He'd come into her life with nothing but a sack of seed and a promise. Yet in weeks he'd given her more than she could have imagined. Hope, partnership, and feelings she was increasingly unable to deny. 4 days later, Warren's friends arrived, 3 weathered cowboys named Hank, Luther, and Caleb. They were good-natured men who treated Virginia with respect and didn't question her ability to join the cattle hunt. After a day of preparation, gathering supplies and readying horses, the small party set out for the canyon land south of the ranch. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they rode, towering red rock formations rising on either side as they followed game trails and dry washes deeper into the wilderness. Virginia led them to the first of several hidden springs she remembered from childhood explorations with her father. If there are cattle out here, they'll be coming to water, she explained as they made camp near a small but reliable spring. We should see signs by morning. Sure enough, at dawn they found fresh cattle tracks in the soft mud around the spring. Following the trail led them to a small group of 6 cattle, 2 cows with calves, and 2 yearling steers. Only the adult cows bore brands, one from the Bowden ranch and one from a spread Virginia didn't recognize. That's the Circle M, Hank said, examining the unfamiliar brand. They went under 2 years ago. Owner died, no heirs. Their stock scattered all over creation. So these are legitimately unclaimed? Virginia asked. Hank nodded. Far as I know, the bank sold off what they could round up but wrote off the rest as losses. These would be fair game. Over the next 10 days, they systematically searched the maze of canyons, finding small groups of cattle at various water sources. Some bore recognizable brands from defunct operations, while others, particularly the younger animals, were unbranded. By the time they were ready to begin the drive back, they had gathered nearly 40 head, not a large herd by any standard, but potentially enough to save the ranch if they could get them to market in good condition. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Twice they nearly lost cattle to flash floods that roared through the narrow canyons after brief but intense thunderstorms. Virginia proved her worth repeatedly, riding as hard and working as tirelessly as any of the men. At night, as they sat around the campfire, she found herself drawn to the quiet conversations she shared with Warren while the others slept. "My father would have liked you," she said one night as they took the first watch together. "He valued competence above all else." Warren smiled, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "I would have liked to know him better. The man I met briefly was someone special. He taught me everything I know about ranching," Virginia said, gazing into the flames, "except how to keep it alive during the worst drought in memory." "You're doing that on your own," Warren replied softly. "With a little help." Virginia looked up to find him watching her, his expression difficult to read in the flickering light. "More than a little," she said. Warren! A sudden commotion among the cattle interrupted whatever she had been about to say. They both jumped to their feet, grabbing rifles as they hurried to investigate. It was a mountain lion, drawn by the scent of the gathered herd. The big cat had spooked the cattle, causing them to bunch together defensively. Warren fired a shot into the air, and the predator disappeared into the darkness with an angry scream. The rest of the night was spent calming the herd and maintaining vigilance against further predator attacks. By morning, they were exhausted but relieved to have lost no animals. As they began the drive back toward Moab, new challenges emerged. The cattle, wild and unaccustomed to being herded, constantly tried to scatter. The terrain was difficult, requiring careful navigation to avoid losing animals to accidents in the rough country. And always, there was the pressure of time they needed to reach Green River with enough days remaining to make the payment to the bank. On the third day of the drive, disaster struck. They were crossing a narrow pass when a rattlesnake spooked the lead steer. The animal bolted, causing a chain reaction through the herd. Virginia, Riding Point, was caught in the sudden stampede. Warren watched in horror as her horse lost its footing on the rocky trail, sending both animal and rider tumbling down a steep embankment. Without hesitation, Warren spurred his horse down the treacherous slope, heedless of his own safety. He found Virginia lying motionless among the rocks, her horse standing nearby, miraculously uninjured. The fall had knocked her unconscious, and a gash on her forehead was bleeding freely. Warren gathered her carefully in his arms, his heart pounding with fear. "Virginia, Virginia, can you hear me?" She stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her lips. Warren had never felt such relief as when her eyelids fluttered open, revealing confused but alert eyes. "The cattle," she murmured, trying to sit up. "Damn the cattle," Warren said fiercely. "I thought I'd lost you." Virginia raised a hand to her bleeding head. "Takes more than a tumble to get rid of me," she said, attempting a weak smile. Warren helped her to a sitting position, examining her injuries with gentle hands. The head wound was superficial, but she had badly bruised her shoulder and ribs in the fall. She wouldn't be able to ride properly for days. "We need to get you back to the ranch," Warren decided. "No," Virginia protested. "We can't abandon the drive." "The bank, you can't ride," Warren interrupted. "And I won't risk your life." Hank approached, leading Warren's horse. "We can make a travois," he suggested. "Carry her alongside. Slow us down some, but we can still make Green River in time if we push hard." Warren wanted to refuse, to insist on taking Virginia directly home, but he saw the determination in her eyes. This cattle drive represented their last hope of saving her ranch. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly. "But at the first sign your condition is worsening, we turn back." "The ranch isn't worth your life. It's all I have left," Virginia said quietly. Warren's expression softened as he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not." The moment hung between them, fraught with unspoken feelings. Then Caleb and Luther arrived with the rest of the gathered herd, and the moment passed as they turned their attention to constructing a travois and continuing their journey. Progress was slow but steady as they made their way out of the canyon country toward the more open terrain, leading to Green River. Virginia's injuries proved painful but not serious, and by the third day, she insisted on riding her own horse for short periods, though the travois remained available when she needed rest. Throughout the journey, Warren remained constantly at her side, his concern evident in every glance, every gentle inquiry about her comfort. Virginia found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the reassuring bulk of him riding beside her, the way his hand would reach out to steady her, when the trail grew rough. By the time they reached Green River, 8 days after setting out from the canyons, Virginia's physical wounds were healing, but her heart was in turmoil. Somewhere between the exhausting days and quiet nights of the cattle drive, she had fallen in love with Warren Foster, a man who had arrived as a stranger, but had become essential to her world. The cattle buyer, a gruff but fair businessman named Harrington, inspected their small herd with a critical eye. "Not the prime stock I usually buy," he commented, "but they're healthy enough. Times are hard all over, I can use them." The negotiation was tense, with Warren advocating firmly for a fair price, while Virginia worried silently that it wouldn't be enough. When Harrington finally made his offer, Warren looked to Virginia for the decision. She quickly calculated the amount against what they owed the bank. It would be enough to make the half payment Jenkins had demanded, with a small sum remaining. She nodded, and Warren shook Harrington's hand to seal the deal. That evening, after paying Hank, Luther, and Caleb their shares and bidding them farewell, Virginia and Warren sat alone in the small hotel dining room in Green River, celebrating their success with the first proper meal they'd had in weeks. "We did it," Virginia said, raising her glass of lemonade in a toast. 6 months of breathing room. Warren clinked his glass against hers, his expression thoughtful. "And the wheat should be ready to harvest in 3 weeks, if it yields as well as it looks like it might." "We could make the next payment, too," Virginia finished, allowing herself to truly believe in the future for the first time in months. "Virginia," Warren began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been thinking about what happens after the harvest." Virginia's heart quickened. "Have you?" he nodded, setting down his glass carefully. "Our agreement was for a single growing season, a partnership for this crop." "Yes, I remember," Virginia said, trying to keep her voice even despite the sudden fear that he was planning to leave once the harvest was complete. Warren took a deep breath. "I'd like to propose a more permanent arrangement." Virginia waited, scarcely daring to breathe. "The ranch needs more than wheat," Warren continued. "With the money from the cattle, we could buy a small breeding herd, start rebuilding. Maybe add some sheep. They do well in this country and will always fetch us a decent price." "You want to stay," Virginia said softly. It wasn't a question. Warren's blue eyes locked with hers. "More than anything," he admitted, "but not just as your partner in business, Virginia." The world seemed to still around them as Warren reached across the table to take her hand. "These past months, working alongside you, seeing your strength, your determination, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever known." Virginia felt warmth spreading through her chest, but she needed clarity. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Foster?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, Miss Bowden, in an ideal world, I'd court you properly with your father's blessing, Sunday socials, and chaperoned buggy rides." His expression grew serious again. "But we don't live in that world. We live in Moab, where life is hard and time is precious. So I'm asking if you might consider me as more than a business partner. If you might give me the chance to prove myself worthy of your affection." Virginia looked down at their joined hands, his large and sun-darkened, her smaller but equally calloused from hard work. "I think you've already proven yourself, Warren." She raised her eyes to his. "And I think you know my feelings." "I'd like to hear them all the same," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Virginia took a deep breath. "I care for you, Warren, more than I thought possible after such a short time. The ranch was my father's life's work, and saving it means everything to me. But these past months have shown me that a piece of land, no matter how precious, isn't worth much without someone to share it with." The smile that spread across Warren's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. Is that a yes to my very poorly worded proposal? Virginia laughed, the sound light and free in a way it hadn't been since before the drought. It's a yes to seeing where this leads us, to building something together, and I don't just mean wheat fields. They rode back to Moab the next day, the bank draft safely tucked in Virginia's saddlebag. The journey seemed shorter somehow, filled with easy conversation and shared dreams for the future of the ranch. When they crested the final hill and the Bowden property came into view, they both reined in their horses, stunned by what they saw. The wheat field was a sea of gold, rippling in the afternoon breeze. In their absence, the crop had matured beautifully, standing tall and heavy with grain. "It's ready," Virginia breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "Warren, it's ready to harvest." They spurred their horses forward, eager to inspect their miracle up close. The wheat was indeed ready, perhaps a bit early, but strong and healthy. The gamble had paid off beyond their expectations. "We need to start harvesting tomorrow," Warren said, running his hand over the golden stalks. "Every day we wait risks losing grain to birds or a sudden storm." Virginia nodded, already mentally preparing for the exhausting work ahead. "I'll ride into town first thing, see if I can hire some hands." The bank payment was made the following day, buying them the promised 6 months of security. With the immediate financial pressure eased, they turned their full attention to bringing in the wheat harvest. Word had spread through Moab about the Bowden ranch's unexpected recovery. Several of Virginia's former ranch hands, now working elsewhere, volunteered to help with the harvest during their off hours. Even Harold Jenkins made an appearance, his skepticism giving way to grudging admiration as he surveyed the abundant field. "Impressive, Miss Bowden," he admitted. "Perhaps I underestimated your determination." "Perhaps you did, Mr. Jenkins," Virginia replied with a smile that held no resentment. "I believe this demonstrates the ranch's viability going forward." The harvest took just over a week of intense labor. Each day began before dawn and continued until darkness made work impossible. Warren worked tirelessly alongside the hired hands, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face etched with exhaustion but also deep satisfaction. Virginia moved among the workers, providing water and food, taking her turn at the scythe when needed. In the evenings, she would sit with Warren on the porch, too tired to speak but sharing a profound sense of accomplishment as they watched the growing pile of harvested wheat. When the last of the grain was safely stored, Virginia paid the workers with a combination of cash and a portion of the wheat itself. As the last wagon pulled away, she found herself alone with Warren for the first time in days. "We did it," she said, leaning against the porch railing beside him. "Actually did it," Warren nodded, gazing out at the now empty field. "First step of many," he said, "but a crucial one." Virginia turned to look at him, taking in the strong profile that had become so dear to her. "I've been thinking about what you said in Green River," she began. Warren looked at her, his expression carefully neutral. And I think we've wasted enough time dancing around what we both want." Virginia straightened, gathering her courage. "Warren Foster, I'm in love with you, have been for weeks now. If your offer still stands, I'd like to make this partnership in all ways." For a moment, Warren simply stared at her, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Then he closed the distance between them in 2 strides, gathering her in his arms with such enthusiasm that he lifted her off her feet. "Virginia Bowden," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you have made me the happiest man in the Utah Territory." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration. The second was deeper, filled with the passion they'd both been restraining for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless and flushed, Virginia laid her head against Warren's chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. "I should speak to the Reverend," Warren murmured, his chin resting atop her head. "See how soon he can marry us." Virginia smiled against his shirt. "Is that a proper proposal, Mr. Foster?" Warren chuckled, the sound vibrating against her cheek. "Not even close." He stepped back, still holding her hands, and to Virginia's surprise, lowered himself to one knee. "Virginia Bowden, you are the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known. You've faced drought, debt, and despair without surrendering. You've worked alongside me through exhaustion and injury. I came here to fulfill a promise to your father, but I'm staying because I've found the other half of my soul." His blue eyes shone with sincerity. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Virginia felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not the sorrow that had been her constant companion before Warren's arrival. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Moab, with half the town in attendance. The Reverend spoke of partnership and perseverance, themes that resonated deeply with the bride and groom. Virginia wore her mother's dress, carefully altered to fit her slender frame. Warren, in a new suit purchased with some of the wheat profits, looked so handsome it nearly took Virginia's breath away. The celebration afterward was held at the Bowden Ranch, now officially the Foster Ranch, though the original name remained on the deed out of respect for Virginia's family legacy. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighbors and friends. Music and laughter filled the air as the sun set over the Utah landscape. As Virginia and Warren danced under the stars, she caught sight of Harold Jenkins watching them with an expression that might almost be called approval. "I think we've won over the bank," she murmured in Warren's ear. Warren followed her gaze and chuckled. "Good. We'll need them on our side for what I have planned next." Virginia raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be, Mr. Foster?" "Expansion, Mrs. Foster," Warren replied with a grin. "That north section would be perfect for the cattle operation we discussed, and the eastern slope for an orchard. Peaches do well in this climate with proper irrigation." Virginia laughed, delighted by his ambition and the way he included her in every plan. "One miracle at a time, Warren. We've only just harvested our first crop." Warren's expression softened as he drew her closer. "The wheat was just the beginning, Virginia. The best is yet to come." As the celebration continued around them, Virginia rested her head on her husband's shoulder, marveling at how much had changed in a few short months. From the brink of losing everything to finding not only salvation for her family's legacy, but also the love of her life, all because a stranger had arrived with a sack of seed and the words, "We replant together." 2 years later, Virginia stood on the porch of the Foster Ranch, a sleeping infant cradled in her arms as she watched Warren directing the spring planting. The drought had finally broken the previous winter, bringing blessed rain to the thirsty land. The creek flowed strong again, supplementing the irrigation system they had expanded to cover 3 large fields. Beyond the wheat, a small herd of cattle grazed on restored pastureland. The orchard Warren had envisioned was now a reality, with young peach trees beginning to show their first spring blossoms. The ranch had not only survived but was thriving under their combined care. As if sensing her gaze, Warren looked up from his work and waved. Virginia smiled, lifting their son's tiny hand to wave back. Thomas Warren Foster, named for both his grandfathers, was just 6 weeks old, born during the last snowfall of winter. Warren excused himself from the workers and strode toward the house, his long legs covering the distance quickly. He climbed the porch steps and placed a gentle kiss on Virginia's forehead before carefully pulling back the blanket to peek at his sleeping son. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" he asked, his voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "Wonderful," Virginia replied, leaning into her husband's embrace. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Warren's arm tightened around her shoulders. "From a desperate rancher and a drifter with a bag of seeds to this," he agreed, his gaze sweeping over their prosperous land. "I still can't believe sometimes how lucky I was that you chose our ranch to stop at," Virginia said. Warren shook his head. "Not luck, Virginia. Providence." He smiled down at his son. "Everything that led me here, every hardship, every wandering year was worth it for this moment." Little Thomas stirred in his sleep, tiny fingers curling against the blanket. Virginia watched her husband's expression soften as he looked at their child, marveling at the tenderness in this strong man who had changed her world. "I've been thinking," Warren said after a moment. "That southwest pasture would be perfect for horses. We could start a breeding program, raise some fine stock for selling." Virginia laughed softly. "Always planning, aren't you?" "Planning for our future," Warren corrected gently. "For Thomas's future." He gazed out at the ranch that had become more than either of them had dreamed. "This is just the beginning, Virginia. Just imagine what this place will be in 20 years. Virginia followed his gaze, seeing not just what was before them now, but the vision of what could be the ranch growing and changing through the seasons of their lives together, through the years of their son's childhood and beyond. From near devastation to abundance, from strangers to family, they had transformed both the land and themselves through shared work and shared love. "Together," she said, echoing the promise that had started it all. Warren smiled, drawing her and their son closer in his embrace. "Always together." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across their flourishing fields, Virginia Foster knew with absolute certainty that the hardships they had faced had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The drought that had nearly destroyed her had ultimately brought her greatest blessing, a partner who had not only saved her ranch, but had given her a love story more beautiful than she could have imagined. And it had all begun with a bag of seed and 7 simple words. "We replant together."